I sat at that dinner table while his mother called me the help. His sister asked if I was there to clear plates. They laughed like I wasn't even human. I was about to walk out forever when the dining room doors opened and everything changed. Hey everyone, before we dive into this story, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You won't believe what happens when money meets prejudice. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my shoes. Now, let me take you back to the worst night of my life. My name is Candace, and 18 months ago, I met someone who made me believe in love again. His name was Michael, and we met at a community center fundraiser in Detroit where I work as a social worker. I was serving food to families when this man in jeans and a simple button-down walked up and asked if he could volunteer. Not donate, not write a check, volunteer. That caught my attention because most people who looked like they had money just wanted the tax write-off and a photo opportunity. Michael stayed the whole day. He helped carry boxes, played basketball with the kids, and sat with the elderly folks listening to their stories. When the event ended, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I said yes, and that coffee turned into dinner, which turned into walks through the city, which turned into me falling completely in love with this man. He was kind, thoughtful, and present in a way I'd never experienced before. He drove a regular Toyota, lived in a modest apartment, and never once mentioned coming from money. I thought he was a teacher or maybe worked in nonprofit like me. He let me think that, and honestly, I didn't care enough to dig deeper because what we had felt real. About 6 months into our relationship, Michael started acting nervous. He'd begin sentences and then stop himself. He'd pick up his phone to show me something, then change his mind. Finally, one evening while we were cooking dinner together at my apartment, he told me he needed to talk. My heart dropped because you know those words never mean anything good. I sat down on my worn couch preparing myself for heartbreak when he said something I never expected. "I need you to meet my family." I laughed, actually laughed out loud because I thought that's what you say when things are going well, not when you're about to break up. But Michael wasn't laughing. He sat down next to me, took my hands, and said his family was complicated. He said they were traditional and set in their ways, and he'd been avoiding bringing me around because he didn't want their opinions to affect what we had. Red flag number 1 should have been that statement right there, but I was in love and optimistic and maybe a little naive. I told him I could handle complicated. I'd grown up in Detroit, worked in social services, and dealt with difficult people every single day. How bad could his family be? He looked at me with these sad eyes and said, "Candace, my family has money. A lot of it. And they think that makes them better than other people." I squeezed his hand and told him money doesn't impress me, and if his family had issues with who he dated, that said more about them than me. He seemed relieved, kissed my forehead, and told me the dinner was next Saturday. I had 1 week to prepare to meet the people who raised the man I loved. That week, I obsessed over every detail. I bought a beautiful navy dress that was elegant but not too flashy. I got my hair done at my cousin's salon, and she hooked me up with this gorgeous silk press. I practiced conversation topics and reminded myself to smile, be polite, and show them that their son had chosen someone worthy of him. My mama called me the night before and told me to keep my head up and remember who I was, no matter what happened. I should have listened closer to the warning in her voice. Saturday came, and Michael picked me up in a car I'd never seen him drive before, a Mercedes. When I raised my eyebrows, he just shrugged and said he borrowed it from his brother. We drove out of the city, further and further into neighborhoods I'd only seen in magazines. The houses got bigger, the lawns got wider, and my stomach got tighter. Then we pulled up to a gate, an actual gate with an intercom and a security camera. Michael punched in a code, and those gates swung open to reveal a driveway that seemed to go on forever, leading to what I can only describe as a mansion. I turned to look at Michael, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. "You said your family had money," I whispered. "This isn't just money, Michael. This is wealth." He finally looked at me with guilt written all over his face and admitted that his family had built a business empire over generations. They owned properties, investments, companies, things I couldn't even wrap my head around in that moment. I asked him why he never told me, and he said the saddest thing. Because I wanted you to love me, not for what my last name could give you. My heart broke a little because I realized this man had been living in fear that everyone who got close to him only wanted his money. But I also felt betrayed because he'd hidden something massive from me. I didn't have time to process it, though, because we were already pulling up to the front entrance where a man in an actual butler uniform stood waiting. The butler opened my door, and when I stepped out, he looked at me with something I recognized immediately: pity. That look told me everything I needed to know about what I was walking into. The inside of that house was like a museum. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, paintings that probably cost more than I'd make in 10 years. And there, standing in the foyer like they were posing for a family portrait, was Michael's family. His mother Diane stood in the center, dripping in pearls and judgment. His sister Rachel wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes and a designer dress I'd seen in Vogue. His brother Trevor had his arms crossed like he was already annoyed, and his father Charles barely glanced up from his phone. Michael introduced me, and I extended my hand with the warmest smile I could manage. Diane's handshake was limp, like touching me might contaminate her. Rachel looked me up and down before taking my hand for exactly 1 second. Trevor nodded without moving, and Charles just grunted. The first words out of Rachel's mouth were, "Oh, Michael didn't mention you'd be so urban." Urban. That word hung in the air like smoke, and I knew exactly what she meant. I felt Michael tense beside me, but I kept smiling because I wasn't going to let them see me break. Not yet. We moved into the dining room, and I swear it was bigger than my entire apartment. The table was set with china so delicate I was afraid to breathe near it, and there were more forks than I knew what to do with. They seated me at the far end of the table, away from Michael, who kept trying to catch my eye while his mother directed everyone to their places. I sat down, smoothed my dress, and told myself I could get through one dinner. But it wasn't just one dinner. It was an interrogation disguised as polite conversation. Diane started asking questions about my background, and the way she said background made it sound dirty. Where was my family from? What did my parents do? Where did I go to school? Each answer I gave was met with this surprised look, like they couldn't believe a black woman from Detroit could string together coherent sentences. When I mentioned I had a master's degree in social work, Rachel actually gasped and said, "Really? That's so impressive." The way she said impressive felt like an insult. Then Diane went for the throat. She looked at Michael with this syrupy, sweet voice and said, "Michael, dear, whatever happened to that lovely girl Brooke? You two looked so perfect together." I felt my face get hot, but I kept quiet. Michael shifted uncomfortably and said that was a long time ago and we should focus on the present. But Diane wasn't done. She kept bringing up women from Michael's past, all with names like Brooke and Ainsley and Catherine, all white, all from families they approved of. Trevor decided to join in with what he probably thought was humor. He said something about making sure to count the silverware before I left, then laughed like it was the funniest joke ever told. Rachel nearly spit out her wine laughing and added that maybe someone should watch the jewelry too. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I blinked them back. I looked at Michael, silently begging him to say something, and he finally did. He told them to stop, that they were being disrespectful, but Diane just waved her hand and told him to relax. They were only having fun. Fun. They thought humiliating me was fun. I felt something inside me crack, but it was when Diane rang a little silver bell for the house staff that I completely broke. She looked directly at me and said, "Oh, I thought you were the new help. Would you mind bringing out more wine from the kitchen?" The table erupted in laughter. Not polite chuckles, full, loud, mocking laughter, and in that moment, I realized they'd never intended to give me a chance. From the second I walked through that door, they'd decided I wasn't good enough, and nothing I said or did would change their minds. I stood up, my chair scraped against that expensive marble floor, and the laughter died. I picked up my purse, looked Diane straight in her cold eyes, and said, "I don't need to sit here and take this. Her face transformed from amused to furious in seconds. She had the audacity to ask me how I dared speak to her that way in her home, like that somehow gave her the right to treat me like I was beneath her. I started walking toward the front door. Behind me, I heard Rachel say something about me running away and how typical that was. Michael was calling my name, torn between following me and dealing with his family. I heard Diane's voice ring out clear as a bell. "Let her go, Michael. She's not one of us. She never will be." Those words hit me like physical blows. I reached the massive front door, put my hand on the handle, and let the tears finally fall because I thought no one could see me anymore. I was done. I was leaving. I was never looking back. Then the door opened from the outside, and I nearly fell forward into the person standing there. I looked up through my tears at an elderly black man in an immaculate suit, with kind eyes that took in my face and immediately filled with concern. Behind me, I heard a sound I hadn't heard all evening: complete silence. I turned around to see Diane's face had gone pale. Rachel looked like she'd seen a ghost. Charles had finally looked up from his phone, and Trevor had uncrossed his arms. Even Michael looked shocked. The man's voice was deep and gentle when he asked, "What's going on here?" Diane actually stammered, saying they weren't expecting him. Michael stepped forward and said, "Grandfather, I can explain." Grandfather. This elderly black man was Michael's grandfather, the one who'd built everything. The one Michael had mentioned was always traveling for business. The one the family apparently feared and respected more than anyone else. Mr. Thornton, that was his name, looked at me again and asked me directly what happened. I hesitated because I didn't want to be the one to tear this family apart, but he insisted with such kindness in his voice that I told him everything. Every insult, every joke, every dismissive look and condescending word. As I spoke, his face transformed from concern to disappointment to something that looked like rage controlled by decades of discipline. He turned to Diane and asked if what I said was true. Rachel tried to jump in, calling him Grandpa in this sweet voice, saying they were just joking and I was being too sensitive. Mr. Thornton held up one hand, and Rachel went silent immediately. He looked at his daughter, his grandchildren, his son-in-law, and said something I'll never forget. "I built this family with my bare hands as a black man in America when people like you wouldn't let people like me through the front door. I gave you wealth so you'd never know that struggle. And this is what you've become?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Thornton explained that he'd been watching them through Michael's updates over the years. He'd seen them become everything he'd fought against. He'd given Michael one task: to live like a normal person, find someone who loved him for who he was, not what he had, and bring that person home. It was a test. Michael had passed. They had failed spectacularly. Then came the consequences, delivered in a calm voice that somehow made them more terrifying. Diane was removed as head of the family foundation. Rachel's trust fund was frozen until she completed extensive cultural sensitivity training. Trevor lost his position in the family company, and the estate management, that was being transferred to Michael and me if I'd accept the role. The family stood there in shock, looking at each other like they couldn't believe this was happening. Mr. Thornton turned to me and his voice softened. "Candace, I built this fortune so my family would never face what I faced growing up in Jim Crow, Mississippi. They've forgotten that. They've forgotten where they came from and what it cost to get here. I can't undo what they said to you tonight, but I can make sure it means something." I was overwhelmed. Part of me wanted to walk out that door and never come back. But another part of me, the part that became a social worker to help people, saw an opportunity. Not for money or power, but to actually change something. I looked at Michael, who had tears in his eyes, apologizing for not protecting me better. I looked at his family, who were realizing their world had just shifted on its axis. And I looked at Mr. Thornton, who was giving me the choice. I took a breath and said I'd do it, but on my terms. The Family Foundation would refocus on communities like the one I came from. Real help, not photo opportunities. The family would volunteer their time, not just their money. and there would be regular family meetings where we talked about race, privilege, and what it really meant to honor Mr. Thornton's legacy. It wasn't about punishing them, it was about educating them. That was 6 months ago. The changes haven't been easy. Diane still struggles with seeing me as an equal, but she's trying. She actually apologized to me last month, and while it was awkward, it was genuine. Rachel volunteers at my community center every week now, and I've watched her transform from someone who saw people as beneath her to someone who actually listens and learns. Trevor is in therapy dealing with his own biases. Charles finally put down his phone and started participating in family life. And Mr. Thornton? He's become my mentor, sharing stories of his journey and teaching me about business so I can run the foundation effectively. Michael and I are engaged now. We're planning a wedding that celebrates my culture, my family, and my community. No more hiding who I am or where I come from. Mr. Thornton will walk me down the aisle alongside my father because he says I'm the granddaughter he always hoped one of his grandchildren would bring into the family. Not because of my degree or my job or anything I achieved, but because I had the strength to demand respect when the world tried to take it from me. That dinner was the worst night of my life, but it led to something I never expected, a chance to change a family's legacy and maybe, just maybe, make a difference in how they see people who don't look like them or come from where they come from. So that's how one dinner changed everything. If you've ever been underestimated because of how you look, drop a comment with a raised hand emoji. What would you have done, stayed or walked out? Smash that like button if you believe respect should never be optional, no matter whose table you're sitting at. Subscribe because I've got more stories about standing up when the world tries to knock you down. And remember, your worth isn't determined by anyone's acceptance. Until next time, keep your crown straight and your standards higher.